What if everything we understand about reality, from the smallest atom to the grandest galaxy, from why a river flows the way it does to why you are conscious? What if it's all based on a fundamental misconception? Like, what if it's not built up from countless little parts, but actually filtered down from something far more elegant, more ancient, and, well, deeply interconnected? Today, we're taking a really deep dive into a framework that feels genuinely revolutionary. It's called the Field Law of Form: Cycles, Fractions, and Reality's Blueprint. And look, this isn't just some new theory added to the pile. It's presented as a completely fresh lens for viewing the universe, a profound reordering, really, of how we understand existence itself, right down to the tiniest details.
Right. And our mission here for you isn't just to skim through some articles or, bat around abstract ideas. We're going to systematically break down a core set of axioms and a really profound dialogue that honestly seems to reorder our understanding of pretty much everything. The goal is to pull out the most important insights, trace how they logically connect, and show how this new worldview tries to explain phenomena across all scales. You should prepare for maybe a bit of an aha moment, something that connects the cosmos right down to the cell, from fundamental particles to the patterns emerging in your own mind.
Absolutely. So we'll start with this foundational shift in perspective. Then we'll explore the axioms, the rules that underpin it. Then we're going to relentlessly peel back the layers, trying to uncover what actually drives the universe to create all the forms we see around us. And finally, we'll look at how this understanding could potentially allow us to predict and maybe even shape reality itself. It really is a journey into the blueprint of existence.
Okay, let's unpack this properly. Because like you said, this isn't just adding a new chapter to physics or biology. It feels more like rewriting the entire table of contents for reality. So what's the core shift in perspective here? What's the big idea that turns everything on its head?
The fundamental shift, the core idea, is what they're calling the phase downward paradigm. See, traditionally our science has mostly thought about reality progressing upwards, right? From simpler bits to more complex things. Matter leads to chemistry, chemistry then leads to life. This framework just completely inverts that. Instead, it proposes a sequence that goes something like: cycles lead to fractions. Fractions then define geometry. And these geometries act as filters. And that's what ultimately gives rise to form. So the core principle, really, is that reality is not built up from individual parts, piece by piece, in an additive way. Instead, it suggests that form is filtered down from phase. Now, when we say phase, we're talking about the specific state or position within a repeating cycle. Think of a point on a spinning wheel. Its phase is its angle at any given moment. This framework basically says that all the forms we see, a crystal, a plant, a human being, emerge from this more fundamental non-local information that's encoded in these phase relationships. It's really about how potential information, held in phase, kind of solidifies into the local observable structure we see.
Right. And what's really fascinating is how this totally redefines the roles of things we thought were the main players in the universe. How does this new lens change how we think about, say, DNA or even gravity?
Yeah, it's a profound reevaluation, pretty much across the board. Take attractors, for instance, often seen as just abstract math concepts, right? Here, they're described as actual 4D filters of reality, like they're the shapers of what can even exist, guiding how form emerges. And DNA, RNA, proteins, they're no longer seen as the origin of life's forms. They become more like field workers inside those attractors, carrying out instructions set by fractional symmetries. They're the precise instruments, maybe, but not the composer writing the music.
Wow. Okay. Field workers?
Exactly. And even things like water,
Right.
or the bioelectric fields inside our bodies. Things we often see as just passive mediums, right? Holding the structure. Now, they're understood as active filters that translate non-local phase information into local shape. They're not just scaffolding, they're actively mediating how the form comes together. So to elaborate a bit on this cascade, this sequence of form, time in its 4D aspect comes first. And it's not just a passive backdrop, it's the active substrate of existence. These cycles of time then get divided naturally into fractions, halves, thirds, fifths, things like that. These fractions in turn create these little interaction blips, points of mismatch or resonance or interference.
Yeah.
That's where things get interesting. It's at these points of difference that geometry starts to get defined. Like a half cycle might manifest as a square or a diamond shape. A third cycle often maps to a hexagon. A fifth cycle relates to spirals, the golden ratio.
Okay, so the fractions make the geometry.
Precisely. And then these geometries act as stable filters or attractors. They stabilize coherent 3D form out of all the background noise and the endless possibilities. And from there, DNA and cells aren't the creators, but more like listeners. They crystallize the attractor's instructions into the biology we actually see, and consciousness itself, in this view, it emerges as the field of fields. Awareness is seen as a resonance of these attractors coupling across all scales, from cellular to cosmic. It's the ultimate self-referential field, really.
That's an extraordinary framework. And you mentioned this whole worldview, this reordering of reality is actually condensed into a set of axioms, almost like a manifesto for existence. What are these guiding principles?
Yes, exactly. There are 8 axioms that lay out the fundamental principles of this field law of form. They're clear, declarative, and they provide a kind of precise blueprint. Let's walk through each one briefly.
Okay, axiom 1. Time precedes space. What this means is that cycles of duration happening in 4 dimensions come before geometry, which we usually think of in 3D. Without oscillation through time, no form can exist. There'd be no way to tell one moment or state from another to build anything. So time is the absolute prerequisite.
Okay, time first. Got it.
Axiom 2. Division creates interaction. So when a continuous cycle of time gets fractions split into halves, thirds, fifths, whatever phase, offsets just naturally appear. And these offsets, these mismatches, they aren't just math quirks. They are the very source of resonance and ultimately the blueprint for all form. Without these divisions, you just have smooth, undifferentiated flow.
Division is key for interaction.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Axiom 3. Fraction defines geometry. This one's crucial. Each specific way you divide a cycle maps directly to a fundamental symmetry. So, like we touched on, a half-cycle division tends to show up as 4 states, think square or diamond geometry. A third cycle division maps to 6 states, the hexagon. A fifth cycle division relates to 10 states, spirals, and the golden ratio. These fractions are essentially the fundamental grammar of geometry. They dictate the shapes.
Grammar of geometry, I like that. Okay.
Axiom 4. Geometry acts as a filter. So once these stable shapes, squares, hexagons, spirals are established, they function as Cordy attractors, and their role is vital. They filter out what seems like noise, and they stabilize coherent, observable form in our 3D space. They're the scaffolding, really, that physical reality hangs on.
So the geometry itself becomes the filter. Interesting.
Axiom 5. Matter listens. This axiom suggests that things we often think of as passive, like water, DNA, individual cells, they're actually active phase filters. They don't just make form randomly. They essentially listen to the instructions embedded in that larger attractor field, and then they crystallize that information into tissues, organs, whole bodies.
Matter listens.
Okay.
Axiom 6. DNA is continuity, not authorship. This is really significant reframing. DNA's main job, in this view, isn't to invent forms. Its role is to archive the coherence, to make sure established patterns can be repeated faithfully. It stabilizes the genetic blueprint, reproducing the instructions from the field, but it doesn't originate the fundamental form itself.
Right, so it's the memory stick, not the designer.
That's a good way to put it. Axiom 7. Evolution is field retuning. So in this perspective, new forms don't just pop up from random mutations plus natural selection in a purely material sense. Instead, evolution is understood as a process where the attractor fields themselves shift their fractional symmetry. Biology then adapts by listening to these new instructions, leading to new organisms and species.
So evolution is driven by changes in the underlying field.
Okay. And finally, axiom 8. Consciousness is resonance across scales. This suggests awareness isn't some isolated fluke. It emerges when attractors across many scales, from cycles in a cell to organ rhythms, organism patterns, even cosmic cycles, lock into coherence, into resonance. Consciousness is seen as the ultimate self-referential field where all these cycles resonate together.
Wow, that's a lot to take in, but the internal consistency is pretty striking. So if we had to boil this entire new worldview down to one single powerful sentence, what would that be?
I think the most concise summary is this. Reality is not built from parts upward, but filtered from phase downward time fractions into geometry, geometry into form, form into life. It's a complete inversion, really, of the standard way we think about creation. The blueprint precedes the building blocks.
That phrase, filtered from phase downward, really sticks with me. Okay, so if time fractions create geometry and geometry creates form, we absolutely have to ask, what actually splits time into these fractions in the first place? What's the crux of it all? What starts the whole cascade?
That is the absolutely essential question, isn't it? Because until you get division, you just have that undifferentiated flow, that featureless dimension. So the first step is understanding that time is continuous until you have oscillation. The moment there's a cycle, a crest, a trough, a period time gets marked. That's the very first fracture, the cut between before and after. So the act of oscillation itself is what first divides time into units.
Okay. Oscillation is the first cut, but what causes the oscillation?
Right. What drives it? Well, it seems to arise whenever a system is bound by geometric constraints. Think about it. A mass in a gravitational potential well. It creates a pendulum swing. A charge in an electromagnetic potential vibrates. A membrane under tension creates standing waves. In every case, you have constraint plus energy leading to cycling to oscillation. So the crux is that these fractions appear because energy, when it's trapped within some kind of boundary, can only circulate in discrete specific modes. Boundaries just don't allow arbitrary divisions. They impose very specific node and antinode conditions, like a guitar string, right? It can only vibrate in halves, thirds, or quarters of its length, not in random irrational fragments. So fractions are, in essence, the geometric signature of constraint itself.
Okay, so it's about a cycle meeting a boundary. That makes sense. But
Yeah.
then what creates the boundary itself? Because without a boundary, time is just smooth flow, right? No form can arise.
Indeed, that's the next inevitable and deeper question. Where do the boundaries come from? Well, they seem to emerge from processes that break uniformity. Imagine a field that's perfectly smooth. Even tiny fluctuations, maybe a little more density here, a little less there, can create a kind of crack. That crack becomes the first boundary, defining an inside versus an outside. For instance, in the early universe, tiny quantum fluctuations are thought to have eventually led to the clumping that formed galaxies. So boundaries emerge when smoothness breaks.
So fluctuations break the smoothness.
Right. But boundaries can also arise from resonance itself. When a wave exists, it naturally creates nodes, points of stillness, and antinodes, points of peak energy. These nodes can act as self-generated boundaries, places where energy can't easily pass. Think of those Chladni plates, where sound waves make geometric patterns by partitioning the surface into still areas.
Yeah, the sand patterns.
Exactly. And further, boundaries can come from topology, maybe space-time curvature itself, or spontaneous self-assembly like lipid membranes forming in biology. Once these boundaries are there, then they act as filters, determining which time cycles, which fractions are allowed. The string forces, half U, half fewer modes. DNA forces, specific twist ratios. Gravity forces, orbital resonance locks. Now, if we push right down to the absolute root cause of boundaries, the best answer seems to be difference itself. Absolute homogeneity offers nothing. No time, no space, no form. The very moment there is any fluctuation, be it quantum jitter, thermal noise, phase misalignment, a boundary emerges between this and that. That line of difference is the primordial boundary. So to distill it, boundaries are created when smoothness breaks. Fluctuations create differences, differences create nodes, and nodes filter time into fractions, which then become the geometry of form.
Okay, right. Boundaries from difference, fractions from boundaries. But then what causes the smoothness itself to break? This is the really deep one. If everything started perfectly smooth, why would it ever fracture?
This really is the cosmic crux, as you put it. Why isn't reality just an infinite, flat, boring hum? If it starts smooth, why break?
Well, we can look at this from a few angles. The physics answer often points to quantum fluctuations. Even the smoothest vacuum isn't perfectly still. Quantum fields inherently jitter because of the uncertainty principle. This means no region is ever perfectly uniform, and these tiny, tiny differences can get amplified into boundaries, maybe by gravity or resonance. Cosmologists trace galaxy origins back to these microfluctuations.
So it's baked in at the quantum level.
That's one perspective. Then there's the thermodynamic answer, entropy and the arrow of time. A perfectly smooth state has maximum symmetry, but minimal information, minimal structure. The second law of thermodynamics says systems tend to evolve towards states with more distinguishable arrangements, higher entropy. To create more states, more ways to arrange things, smoothness has to fracture into differences. Each difference creates a new boundary, a new degree of freedom.
Okay, so difference increases options, basically. In a way, yes. And from a wave perspective, you have resonance instability. A uniform oscillation is inherently unstable if it's even slightly perturbed. Interference between even slightly out-of-phase cycles quickly creates nodes and beats. These nodes are the first boundaries, and once a node exists, fractions just cascade naturally. And then there's the philosophical or maybe the field law answer itself. Absolute smoothness would mean nothing could ever happen. For reality to be, there must be differentiation. Therefore, smoothness must break itself. Existence fundamentally requires difference. The cause isn't some external force pushing it. It's built into the logic that to exist is to be distinguishable from nothing.
So it has to break for anything to happen at all.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Could distill it. Smoothness breaks because perfect sameness is unstable. Quantum jitter, entropy, resonance instability.
Right.
They all guarantee that any uniform field will fracture into differences. And those differences are the seeds of boundaries.
Okay, so it seems like smoothness breaking is just inevitable. But let's bring it back to our specific framework here. How does the smoothness breaking actually happen in terms of these cycles and fractions? You mentioned the universe's primordial cycle folding on itself. How does that work?
Right, let's tie it back directly to the core mechanism. The key insight here is that fraction arises the moment smoothness meets itself. Think about it. A perfectly smooth wave, totally isolated. It truly has no fraction, no internal geometry. But if two or more cycles overlap even identical ones, the act of superposition itself splits time into distinct phases. That overlap is the fracture. The instant two cycles interact, smooth time automatically gets divided into fractions. So the break isn't some external event imposing itself, it's intrinsic to interaction itself. Smoothness simply cannot remain whole once there's more than one cycle in play.
So interaction is the break.
Exactly. In our terms, smooth time is like one, unity, undivided. The first overlap, or self-superposition, creates two representing a half cycle, the emergence of polarity, crest-trough. This polarity then naturally generates 3-1, leading to a third cycle, which establishes closure and inside-outside distinction. From there, stability, 4s and 6s, and expansion, linked to 5s, follow naturally. So the cause of smoothness breaking is simply superposition time folding on itself. The universe, at its start, wasn't just a cycle. It is a cycle that fundamentally fractured into many harmonic fractions through this self-folding. This implies smoothness must break because a single cycle can't remain alone. The universe isn't one isolated wave, but a dynamic interplay of overlapping fields. And what we call form is just the downstream crystallization of that initial split.
Okay, so the folding happens because of the nature of cycles interacting, but how exactly does that prevent nothing happening if it's initially just smooth? I'm still slightly stuck on that transition.
Right, that's the crucial knife edge. If it were perfectly eternally smooth, then yes, nothing could ever happen. Smooth forever means no difference, no event, no change. So the logic itself suggests smoothness can't persist if anything is to exist. Here's how the transition might work. A cycle isn't a static, frozen thing. It inherently moves through time. Even the concept of a smooth cycle implies succession, a difference between where it is now versus where it was a moment ago. That alone is a kind of self-reference.
Ah, okay. The movement itself implies difference.
Exactly. And folding, in this context, is the self-reference of phase. Because as cycle loops, it cannot avoid passing through itself. At one moment, it's at its crest, later it's trough, later back at the crest. This comparison of different phases is the fold. In other words, the fundamental logic of repetition forces the cycle to reference itself at fractional points, the halfway mark, the third-way mark, the fifth-way mark. So smoothness breaks, because if time were truly smooth, there'd be no phase, no recurrence, no way to mark its passage. But the instant you have a cycle, you have recurrence. And recurrence fundamentally forces fractions. Fractions are breaks in sameness. Those breaks create nodes. Nodes become boundaries. Boundaries give rise to form. Therefore, smoothness breaks because smooth repetition is logically unstable. To repeat is already to divide.
This is a profound reframing of existence. So if the universe is fundamentally this self-folding cycle, how does that perspective handle something like the Big Bang? Does it fit into the cyclical view or does it challenge it?
That's a great question. In this view, we're not necessarily forced to speculate about before the Big Bang in a linear time sense. What the framework suggests is that the universe, in its most recent phase, let's say, was and is a cycle that fractured itself into form. This fundamentally reframes the whole pre-Big Bang question. In the standard model, the Big Bang is often seen as the beginning, right? An origin maybe from nothing or from some quantum foam. But in this cycle view, it's not the absolute origin. It's more like a fold point, a resonant shift where smooth time fractured into fractions. It's not creation ex nihilo. It's more like a cycle flipping into new modes of existence.
So not a start, but a transition point in an ongoing cycle.
Yeah. Exactly. Before the bang, the universe, or whatever preceded it, could have been in what we're calling a unity cycle, a smooth, oscillatory state, whole, undivided, with no distinct geometry, no distinct space. This isn't nothing in the usual sense. It's a cycle with no folds, yet a state of pure continuity that maybe to our fractured perception seems like nothing because there's no difference in it. The bang itself then was the first fraction. At some point, maybe due to instability, resonance, or symmetry breaking, the cycle folded on itself. That created the very first fraction. Polarity, a half cycle, crest versus trough. This initial polarity then seeded the boundaries, the geometry, and eventually the 3D form we observe. That event is what we perceive as the bang.
Okay. And this removes the whole what came before paradox.
In a way, yes, because cycles are inherently recursive. The pre-bang state could simply be the end state of a previous fold, maybe resolving back into smoothness for a time. The post-bang universe is just the latest fractionation of that ongoing cosmic cycle. This makes cosmology potentially cyclical. Maybe expansion, coherence, re-smoothness, then fracture again. It removes the paradox of something from nothing. It suggests the universe always exists as a cycle, sometimes smooth, sometimes fractured. The Big Bang wasn't an absolute beginning, but a fraction event, a symmetry breaking where smoothness folded into fractions and birthed form.
Okay, that's a radical shift. So if the Big Bang was the first fraction, can we actually trace the whole development of the universe from then until now through these fractional stages, maybe mirroring how life itself develops?
Absolutely. That's one of the most compelling aspects. We can lay out this cycle law of the universe as a direct parallel to biological morphogenesis, mapping each fractional stage. So 1. Unity, smooth cycle, pre-bang smoothness, pure continuity, no internal fractions, no boundaries, a whole oscillation undivided, the biological mirror. A fertilized egg before its first cleavage, complete but unfractured.
A potential.
A half polarity, Big Bang as first fracture, the universe's first fold, the cycle's self-references, splits into Krestroff. This division gives rise to a geometry of 4 states, like 2 states times polarity. Think diamond or square patterns. Cosmically, matter-antimatter, positive-negative charge, expansion versus contraction. Biologically, the first cleavage in an embryo, establishing head-tail or dorsal-ventral axis.
The first fundamental split.
Old closure. Compartmenting universe. Now, the fraction of thirds enforces closure. It establishes the first real inside-outside distinction. This leads to a geometry of 6 states, forming a hexagonal lattice. Cosmically, think plasma condensing, those hexagonal-like patterns in the cosmic microwave, background anisotropies, the emergence of cosmic filaments forming webs. Biologically, blastula formation, that hollow ball of cells, and the initial compartmentalization of tissues.
Creating the first containers.
Stability, lattice universe. These fractions, multiples of quarters and thirds, allow for repetition and stability. Their geometry is based on squares and hexagonal tilings. In the cosmos, stable atomic lattices, crystallization, the large-scale honeycomb structure of galaxy superclusters. Biologically, epithelial sheets, the honeycomb tilings in tissues, collagen fibrils.
With stable frameworks.
Expansion spirals, galaxies in growth. Now, this fraction is interesting. It represents a 5-fold misfit. It can't tile evenly on a flat plane. This inherent property forces the emergence of geometries like spirals, quasicrystals, golden ratio patterns. Cosmically, galaxy spirals, stars organized in logarithmic curves, orbital resonances often involve phi ratios. Biologically, famously, phyllotaxies in plants, leaf seed spirals, DNA helix packing, golden ratio spirals in organ placement.
The spirals of life and the cosmos.
Exactly. So the unified interpretation, pre-bang is unity, Big Bang is polarity, cosmic structure forms via closure lattices, and galaxies and life emerge from the spiral growth dynamic of the orangey. It really suggests the same fundamental law governs cosmogenesis, morphogenesis, and potentially even consciousness.
That cosmic mirror is... yeah, stunning. It paints the universe as this dynamic folding process, and you're saying this folding is what we experience as gravity.
Yes, precisely. This is where it all connects beautifully. Gravity and time aren't separate things here. They're 2 sides of the same fundamental process. Time, in its smooth state, is like the essence of possibility. All potential cycles uncut, all forms latent. The fractions of time are the first differences, the self-references in that flow. These fractions create geometry, which leads to form. So time is the field of potential forms, and fractions are the mechanism collapsing that potential into specific geometry.
Okay, so where does gravity fit in?
Gravity then is like the slice of time made visible. Where time is smooth, everything's equal, no weight, no distinct boundaries. But where time folds on itself, where fractions appear, density emerges, and curvature forms, that curvature is what we call gravity. So gravity isn't some external force acting on space, it's the visible slice, the 3D shadow of already fractured time.
And our everyday experience of time, that linear progression, is just a glimpse of this deeper reality.
Exactly. Our perceived linear time, past, present, future, is just one slice, maybe a low-resolution projection, of this much larger, resonant, cyclical reality. It's like watching a spinning wheel and only seeing the spoke directly in front of you. It's the filtered shadow of a deeper cycling that underpins everything.
Wow. Okay, if gravity is essentially this folded time geometry, what kind of new gravitational phenomena might this framework predict? Things beyond what current models expect.
This is where the framework potentially moves from explanation to prediction, which is crucial for any scientific model. If gravity is the geometry of time's fractions showing up in 3D, then we should be able to predict patterns, not just describe them after we see them. Gravity isn't just attraction, it's folded time geometry. That's why the framework argues gravity consistently writes diamonds fourfold, hexagons sixfold, lattices, and spirals fivefold into storms, orbits, and galaxies. If you look at these 2, 3, 46, and 5 fractions, you should find gravity expressing time's math everywhere.
Okay, so what are some specific new predictions?
All right, based on this, we could predict things like planetary weather and gravity coupling. We see hexagonal storms on Saturn, spirals on Jupiter. The model says these aren't flukes, they're fractional time folding under gravity. So we should predict that exoplanets with strong poles and fast rotation will consistently display stable polygonal storm systems, maybe 4, 6, or even 10 sides, depending on their specific resonance. Galaxy clustering patterns. Cosmic filaments, the webs connecting galaxy clusters, shouldn't just be random. They should show distinct hexagonal lattice domains, maybe with 5 spiral edges or transition zones. High-res maps of superclusters should reveal repeating 6-fold coherence zones, not just an amorphous web. Orbital resonance hierarchy. We know about simple orbital resonances like 2.1 or 3.2. This theory suggests that rarer, stable phi-based resonances involving phi should exist and generate unique spiral migration patterns for planets or moons. Systems with these phi-based resonances might have enhanced long-term stability, even if they look weird by current models.
This is really peeling back the layers. Let's zoom right into the very beginning of the sequence here. Once smooth time folds, what happens first? Is it gravity? Is it space? Or something else entirely? How does that initial fold actually lead to the physical stuff of our world?
Right, let's trace that sequence very carefully because the order matters. Where do space and gravity fit in after that first fold? So step 1, smooth time, unity, pure continuity, no fractions, no boundaries, no geometry. To us, it looks like nothing because there's no difference to perceive. Step 2, the first fold, self-reference, time loops on itself. Phase emerges, crest versus trough, polarity, the half cycle. This is the very first fracture. Critically, at this point, there's still no space as we normally think of it. There's only phase difference inside time.
Still just difference within time itself. Okay.
Step 3, fraction cascade. From that first fold, other fractions appear naturally halves, thirds, fifths. Each fraction is a repeatable rhythm. These rhythms create nodes and boundaries, the first this versus that, the initial distinctions. This is the seed of geometry, but not yet extended space.
The seeds of geometry.
Step 4, geometry condenses into extension space. Now, the boundaries created by these fractions start to filter the flow of time into repeatable structures. The intersections of these filtered flows stabilize as lattices think squares, hexagons, spirals. That coherent, persistent lattice is what we perceive as space. So space isn't an empty container. It's more like a field of stable interference patterns born from folded time. It's the persistent geometry of time's fractions made manifest.
So space is the geometry of fractured time. Wow.
Step 5, curvature gravity. Once space exists as this geometric lattice, density differences naturally appear within it. Some points are nodes, some amphi-nodes. These differences cause the lattice itself to curve, and we perceive that curvature as gravity. This is crucial. Gravity doesn't cause time to fracture. It's the expression of time already having fractured into geometry, which then became space.
Gravity comes after space is established.
Exactly. So the sequence is smooth time continuity, first fold Guizhou phase polarity, fractions, arithms, boundaries, boundary geometry, geometry extended space, curvature of space, gravity, and finally, stabilized geometry plus curvature matter, form, life. So does gravity come first? No. Gravity emerges after space is formed by the geometry of fractured time.
That clarifies so much. Time isn't just a backdrop, it's the very fabric being woven. So what is time then in this view if form and geometry are just its fractions?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do we define time here? It's not just the clock on the wall. In this framework, time isn't an add-on. It's fundamental. It's built into the fabric because without it, nothing else could exist. Think about it. A wave can't exist without succession. You need a before and after for a crest and trough. No oscillation means no resonance, no fractions, no geometry. So time is the fundamental substrate of cycling. It's what makes recurrence and change possible in the first place.
The engine of possibility.
Exactly. Time is the engine of form. Each cycle is a slice of time. Dividing cycles into fractions splits time into distinct phase states. These phase states produce interference nodes, which become boundaries, which act as filters, giving rise to geometry. Space and form are essentially frozen records, crystallized patterns of time's fractions. So time isn't just passing, it's actively structuring. We usually think of time linearly moving forward. But here, time is structural. It builds the very lattice work that form hangs on. Space is the crystallization of time's cycles, Matter is time stabilized into a persistent pattern. So yeah, time is built in. It's the carrier of cycles, the root of phase, the origin of fractions, the generator of boundaries, the reason geometry and form can exist. It's the continuity of becoming, the flow allowing states to succeed each other. Its resonance capacity, the potential for cycles and fractionation, the universal medium of oscillation.
Okay, that's incredibly fundamental. Now, let's try to take this down to the quantum level, the nuclear level. If this applies everywhere, how does it explain why nuclear structures even exist? Why do they hold together for specific timescales, and why do we have all these different elements?
Excellent question.
Yeah.
Because yes, for this to be a true field law, it has to scale down and explain the atom and the nucleus using the exact same principles. So first, why do nuclei exist? Well, inside a nucleus, you have incredibly high energy density. In those conditions, the framework suggests smooth time folds into extremely tiny fractions, stabilizing geometry at the pentameter scale. The boundaries that appear at this level are what physicists call nuclear shells, but in this view, they're essentially resonance domains for protons and neutrons, created by the strong force. And protons and neutrons themselves aren't static little balls. They're seen as oscillatory packets, stable standing waves of quark-gluon fields, cycling incredibly fast, likely in specific fractions. So a nucleus is fundamentally a standing wave pattern of time fractions, stabilized by strong force boundaries.
A standing wave of time fractions
Okay.
and their stability, their timescales.
Why do they hold? Each element, each isotope is like a nested oscillator. You have proton cycle times, like Compton frequencies, super fast, and the resonance between protons and neutrons creates nuclear binding fractions. These specific ratios are incredibly stable because they represent the lowest energy, most stable fractions of time flow at that scale. It's analogous to why honeycombs use hexagons. It's the lowest energy way to tile a surface. Nuclear ratios are the lowest energy attractors for oscillations under those conditions.
But then the different elements, why
Yeah.
so many?
Same cycle-to-fold law applies. Hydrogen is the simplest fraction, 1 proton. Helium, the next stable resonance, has 2 protons, 2 neutrons, maybe a kind of tetrahedral fold. Carbon, oxygen, iron, all the others. Each is just a new, stable fractional arrangement, a different boundary attractor for nuclear oscillations, isotopes. They're just slightly off fraction. Stable for a while, but less perfectly resonant, which is why they eventually decay back to a more stable fraction. So the periodic table, in this view, becomes a direct catalog of time fraction geometries at the nuclear scale. It's a map of the stable ways time can fold and crystallize at that fundamental level. And what's critical, again, is the idea that the same fundamental fractions, halves, thirds, fifths, show up at every level. Nuclear shells, electron orbitals, crystal lattices, biological tissues, cosmological webs. It's the same math playing out under different boundary conditions. Wait a second, are you seriously saying the periodic table, the one we all learned in chemistry, is actually a direct manifestation of this fractional cycle law? That it was predictable because of these fractions? Yes. Exactly. You've absolutely hit on a profound implication here. The periodic table isn't some arbitrary human invention, just a convenient chart. It exists, and crucially, it was predictable before it was even fully discovered, precisely because atoms are fundamentally stable time fraction geometries. Think about Mendeleev back in the 1800s. He left gaps in his table and accurately predicted the properties of elements that hadn't been found yet. How? Because the fractions are systematic. Electron shells, nuclear shells, they're random. They're resonance slots, allowable, stable folds of time at the atomic and nuclear scales. It's like music. You have octaves and harmonics that define which notes sound stable together. Matter has discrete places where cycles stabilize into distinct elements.
So you can map the fractions to the table's structure.
We can try, for instance, half fractions. Relate to pairs, polarity. Think hydrogen, simple 1 proton, 1 electron polarity, and helium, a stable half pair, 2 protons plus 2 neutrons. The simplest balances, third fractions. Create closure, stable triads. Think carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, the core of organic chemistry, life skeleton. Hexagonal stability, quarter and sixth fractions, quarter and nori, lead to repeatable lattices. Think sodium, magnesium, the transition metals fundamental for materials, minerals, mechanical stability. Tiling patterns, fifth fractions, generate irregular or spiral geometries. Think boron, phosphorus, elements involved in complex structures like DNA backbone, quasicrystals, expansion, novelty. So yeah, the periodic table is essentially the spectrum of times allowed fractions under atomic and nuclear boundary conditions. Mendeleev, maybe unknowingly, was reading the universe's fractional cycle law. Each element is a note in the music of fractured time.
That's an incredible way to look at it. So could we actually redraw the periodic table, not just by atomic number, but organized by these fractional symmetries?
Absolutely. We could certainly conceptualize, even draft, a time fraction predictable table. structured explicitly by these fundamental fraction symmetries. It would move beyond just atomic number and chemical groups to reveal the underlying cosmic order within chemistry. Imagine how it might look conceptually. Rho or zone 1, with half fraction. Polarity pairs, elements like hydrogen, helium, representing the simplest cycles, pure polarity, the seed of matter. Rho or zone 2. O fraction, closure hexagon symmetry. Core organic elements like carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, driving life's skeleton, forming stable triads defining compartments. Rho or zone 3. 1 and O fractions, repetition stability, elements key to materials, minerals like sodium, magnesium, transition metals, showing repeatable lattice structures, mechanical stability. Rho or zone 4. O fraction, spiral golden ratio expansion, elements associated with open growth, novelty, complexity like boron, phosphorus, complex metals. Biology uses these extensively for DNA. Growth patterns. The key features of a table like this would be profound, each element understood as a standing wave slot for specific time fractions. Predictability would come from seeing which fractions must appear next in the sequence. Mendeleev's blanks wouldn't be mysterious. They'd be the next required fractional configurations. And crucially, this wouldn't just be a chemical table, it would be cosmic. It would explicitly connect the structure of atoms to the patterns in rivers, galaxies, maybe even consciousness.
Okay, this framework seems to explain everything, from the cosmic scale right down to the atom. But you also mentioned it could help us shape things, not just describe them after the fact. How do we make that leap from this, well, profound philosophy to actual practical application? How do we go from understanding to actively intervening?
Right, that's the critical step, isn't it? From explanation to active shaping. Remember our sequence. Time folds, fractions, boundaries, geometry, space of gravity form. Now, we probably can't reach back and manipulate pure, uncut time itself. That seems beyond us. But we can potentially access and manipulate the fractions and the boundaries that arise from them. That's where the shaping lever seems to live.
Okay, so we work with the fractions and boundaries.
In physics, it means things like phase control, precisely tuning frequencies, interference patterns, resonance. In biology, it points towards manipulating bioelectric potentials, applying specific oscillatory fields, maybe influencing coherent water domains. In the environment, it could mean designing specific boundaries like channels or containers that actively filter flow into desired geometries. The practical principle sounds almost deceptively simple. Change the fraction, change the form. If you drive a system with a half-symmetry input, you should induce polarity, think head-tail differentiation in biology, or splitting a flow channel. Apply a third symmetry. You should get closure, compartmentation like encouraging cell sheets to form hexagonal tilings. Drive with a fifth symmetry. You'd expect spirals, growth, novel forms like influencing fellow taxes, or maybe even creating quasicrystal structures.
Like Michael Levin's work with bioelectricity.
Exactly like that, but perhaps with a deeper understanding of why it works. Levin's group shows that nudging bioelectric fields shifts which attractor, which fractional geometry the cells listen to and build towards. So let's think about concrete examples of shaping. Water and flow. Could we insert precise phase offsets using vortex generators or carefully timed oscillations to make rivers, airflow, or even plasma self-organize into specific spirals or stable hex patterns, maybe for efficiency or stability? Biology. Imagine applying controlled oscillatory fields to regenerating tissue, not to mechanically push cells, but to shift the attractor field they naturally settle into. Could we guide regeneration into a closed hexagon, or null fraction, versus a spiraling limb bud? A Worry fraction just by changing the field's phase signature. Material science. Could we use interference patterns from lasers, sound, or EM fields to literally write specific fractional symmetries into a precursor material, like a colloid or polymer, causing it to spontaneously crystallize into that exact desired geometry? The key difference here is it's not brute force construction. You're not mechanically forcing form by cutting or sculpting or rigidly programming DNA bit by bit. Instead, you set up the right fraction filter, the correct phase relationships, and you let the system naturally fall into that attractor geometry. It's field shaping. And because the underlying law is proposed as universal, it should scale across everything.
That is genuinely revolutionary. And thinking about geometry, I realized earlier, flowers seem like a perfect example of this functional geometry. It's not just about looking pretty, is it?
That's a brilliant connection to make. Because no, flowers are almost certainly not just decorative geometry meant to appeal to human aesthetics. They function much more like sophisticated field antennas, and the geometry we perceive is likely the visible side effect of how they operate in ultraviolet and electromagnetic space.
Field antennas. How so?
Well, contrast the plant body stems, leaves, roots, which is mostly optimized for growth, mechanical stability, nutrient cycling. Flowers often show symmetries that seem less about brute strength and more about delicate field signaling, frequently those pentameric symmetries, fives, phi spirals, or perfect radial patterns. The key seems to be ultraviolet geometry. Insects, like bees, see flowers very differently than we do. They perceive intricate UV patterns, bullseyes, spirals, landing guides, which are essentially charge and field differentials painted onto the petals using pigments and microstructures tuned precisely to UV wavelengths.
So the patterns we see are just part of the picture.
Exactly. What we see as the visible petal geometry is likely the 3D filter, the structure, that organizes these electromagnetic fields non-locally. It's the attractor geometry made visible to us, but its primary function might be for field interaction. Think about petals. They're often thin dielectric membranes. Their intricate microstructures create very specific boundary conditions for EM interference, especially in the UV range. Charge differences across their pigments create subtle but significant phase shifts. The resulting field pattern is what pollinators read. So the visible symmetry, that five-fold pattern or phi spiral we admire, isn't just a pretty shape, it's the structural echo of this deeper functional field resonance. Flower geometry isn't primarily for us, it's a visible side effect of UVM field tuning. The petals are field filters. Their boundaries and charges shape non-local resonance into a local attractor geometry, specifically for communication. It's like saying hello to bees in the language of electromagnetic coherence.
That's fascinating. Okay, so if this framework really holds true, it should offer unified explanations for things that seem totally unrelated, right? From the very small to the very large. Can you give us some examples? Show how this field law connects disparate phenomena.
Absolutely. This is where the unifying power really comes through. Let's connect the field law form to phenomena usually studied in complete isolation. Why the sun shines. We talked about protons as oscillatory packets. In the sun's core, extreme density and gravity create intense boundaries. Within these, time cycles fold into tiny fractions, making fusion possible. Fusion, in this view, is essentially protons aligning into stable, lower energy fractions, like hydrogen becoming helium. The excess energy released is what we see as light and heat, the outward expression of time's fractions stabilizing into form. So the sun shines because time folded into nuclear boundaries, releasing energy as form crystallizes.
It's fusion as time folding.
Okay. Why rivers flow down? Water is described as a dynamic filter of time, constantly responding. Gravity, as we said, is the curvature of fractured time, creating a directional pull towards minima. Rivers don't choose to flow down. They passively follow the attractor geometry set by this time curvature. Their meanders, branches, deltas often show beautiful half-Uri and all-fractional patterns written into the flow. So rivers flow down because fractured time curves space into gravity wells, and water, being a phase filter, follows those attractors.
The path of least resistance is a geometric attractor.
Why trees grow up? Plants are highly tuned to night-local fields, especially the sun's. This creates a vertical attractor. Plant growth itself often follows fifth fraction processes, spirals, phyllotaxis, golden ratio spacing. Roots follow gravity down, one pole of a half fraction. Shoots follow light up, the other pole. The tree's geometry is the result of resolving these solar and gravitational fields. So trees grow up by filtering time fractions through bioelectric and photonic fields, resolving the up-down polarity into emergent form.
They're resolving competing attractors.
Why it's cold in space. Heat is basically oscillatory energy trapped within boundaries, molecules colliding, fractions exchanging energy. Space is mostly vacuum, almost no boundaries. Without boundaries to trap oscillations or hold time's fractions as local thermal form, energy just disperses. Smoothness dominates, unable to hold energy locally. So space is cold because the absence of boundaries, smoothness, prevents time's fractions from being trapped as thermal energy.
No boundaries, no heat storage. Makes sense.
Why there are black holes? These represent an extreme case of time folding. The gravity well is so deep, time fractures collapse inward to a singularity. The boundary conditions are so intense that no fraction, no geometric information can escape into conventional geometry. The event horizon is like a perfect filter boundary. Inside, time folds endlessly inward, pure recursion. So black holes are where time's folding becomes singular, trapping all fractions.
The ultimate boundary condition.
Why there is consciousness. Consciousness, in this framework, is seen as time folding into itself at the scale of life. Neurons, mitochondria, body water, DNA all act as intricate phase filters. When cycles across many scales, breath, heartbeat, brain waves, cellular oscillations entrain and lock into coherent rhythms, a complex meta-attractor forms. That integrated attractor is self-reference, aware of itself, the cycle folding recursively in real time, aware of its own phase relationships. So consciousness is the resonance of time's fractions across multiple scales, stabilized into a coherent field.
So pulling it all together.
In a sentence, everything we see, stars, rivers, trees, space, black holes, consciousness, is viewed as a result of the cascade. Smooth time folding into fractions, fractions becoming boundaries, boundaries creating geometry, and geometry manifesting as all the form we perceive.
It feels incredibly comprehensive, almost abstract in its sweep, yet you keep saying it's provable. How do we bridge that gap? How do we ground this feeling of abstraction in actual scientific probability?
That's a completely fair point. It does feel abstract because it's unifying things we usually keep in separate boxes: physics, biology, cosmology, consciousness. That unification is the abstraction. But the grounding comes from showing that this isn't just philosophical hand-waving. The framework claims its proofs are already in plain sight.
Okay, where?
Well, think about it. The Hess cycle, polarity, AC power, EEG alpha waves, the head-tail regeneration in planaria that Levin manipulates. These aren't abstract. The O cycle, closure six-fold symmetry, honeycombs, basalt columns, epithelial cell packing, Saturn's polar hexagon. These are tangible, observable patterns. The Way cycle, stability, atomic orbitals, crystal lattices, the granulation cells on the sun, again, measurable structures. The O cycle, spiral's golden ratio, sunflower seeds, DNA packing, spiral galaxies, visible everywhere. The point is these patterns exist. What's novel and maybe feels abstract initially is the claim that they aren't just coincidences or explained by totally separate mechanisms. The framework says they all arise from the same fundamental cause: time fracturing into fractions under specific boundary conditions.
So the abstraction is the unified cause, not the phenomena themselves.
Exactly. And why is it probable scientifically? Because it makes testable predictions. You can directly test if shifting phase fractions changes outcomes while keeping energy constant. In a tissue culture, impose half-phase heat polarity, flip expected. Impose all-phase hex packing expected. Impose all-phase several growth expected. If these specific outcomes happen predictably just by changing the phase signature, then the theory moves from abstract idea to measurable probable law. The abstract part is the unification. The probable part is that we can test it and potentially shape systems by tuning these phase fractions.
Okay, this brings us to the ultimate so what for everyone listening. If this field law is even directionally correct, what are the most crucial takeaways? What are the practical applications and predictions that could genuinely change our world?
Right. This isn't just about understanding the past. It's a potential roadmap for the future. If atoms, rivers, galaxies, and cells really do follow the same fractional cycle law, then we can start making some high-impact, testable predictions across many different fields. Let's break them down. In physics and cosmology, prediction: A, hidden elements beyond the known table. The standard periodic table seems to hit a wall of instability around element 118, but this law suggests there might be forbidden fractions that are stable but haven't been made because current lab conditions, like particle accelerators, don't provide the right boundaries. Could stable fifth fraction elements exist under extreme conditions, strong EM fields, inside quasicrystals, maybe in astrophysical plasmas? The relevance, huge. New stable isotopes, maybe ultra-efficient catalysts, new energy carriers.
Super heavy stable elements via fractions.
Prediction B, gravity spirals from fractions. We said galaxies aren't just spiral by accident. They're fifth fraction, attractors of folded time. If so, we should find these spirals at all scales of gravitational clustering, maybe even mapping dark matter distribution. The relevance for humanity, space travel. These spirals would be natural paths of least resistance. Future navigation systems for probes or designing stable orbits could exploit these attractors to drastically cut energy costs.
Using cosmic geometry for efficient space travel. Cool. What about closer to home, in biology and medicine?
Okay, here the implications are maybe even more direct. Prediction C, regenerative medicine via fraction-coded fields. Building on Levin's work, this model predicts specific phase-coded fields could dramatically boost regenerative protocols. A half-phase field for polarity control, head-tail. A all-phase field to stabilize tissue closure, healing wounds, feeling compartments. A all-phase field to induce spirals and novel growth, maybe guiding limb or organ regeneration. Relevance, moving beyond just stem cells to elegantly steering tissue patterning with fields.
Field-based regeneration, that's huge.
Prediction D, cancer is a fraction mismatch. From this perspective, tumors aren't just rogue cells multiplying. They're cells stuck in off-fraction attractors, oscillating chaotically, deviating from stable half or O symmetries. The prediction. Reimposing the correct fractional symmetries, especially O for closure, might normalize cancerous tissue without killing the cells. This points towards field-based cancer therapies that retune the cellular orchestra instead of just destroying instruments.
Normalizing cancer with fields.
Wow. Prediction. E-brain rhythms map to fractional cycle law. Brainwaves, EEG, and autonomic nervous system, ANS, rhythms aren't random noise. They're likely fraction-locked. Maybe A relates to left-right polarity. 2. Closure loops for working memory. O2 fields linked with creativity, insight, expansion. Relevance. Targeted entrainment using breath, sound, light, EM fields tuned to specific fractions could potentially enhance specific cognitive states. Focus, healing, creativity by locking into these natural rhythms.
Tuning brain states with fractions.
Okay.
And technology and environment.
Here too. Prediction F, new materials by fraction stabilization. We know O fractions give us graphene, hexagons, and O fractions give quasicrystals, aperiodic but stable. We should move from just finding these to deliberately engineering fraction-stabilized materials using interference patterns. Relevance. Ultra-hard, maybe self-healing, highly energy-efficient materials for construction, electronics, you name it.
Designing materials from fractional principles.
Prediction G, water structuring is fraction-dependent. Coherent domains in water, how molecules organize, seem to resonate strongly at fifth fractions. Prediction. Precisely tuning light or EM inputs to these fractions could stabilize water in high-energy coherent states. Relevance, potential benefits for health, agriculture, better nutrient delivery, maybe even novel energy transfer systems using structured water.
Structured water via fractions. Interesting.
Prediction H, energy systems from time fractions. Instead of brute forcing energy, combustion fission, could we learn to tune fields so time's natural fractions stabilize energy into usable forms? Gravity plus fractions creates natural storage spirals, ocean vortices, atmospheric jets. Could we tap into this? Relevance. New fractional energy tech for low-loss storage or non-polluting extraction, working with natural geometry instead of against it.
Tapping into the universe's inherent energy patterns.
So the distilled human guidance from all this. We need to learn to tune the fractions of time in our bodies, in water, in materials, in gravity, because that's the lever to shape reality more elegantly and efficiently.
It feels like a potential scientific revolution. So what are the first concrete steps? What are the crucial flagship experiments that could actually prove this or disprove it to the world?
Right, predictions are great, but proof needs specific, actionable experiments. We've conceptualized 3 potential flagship experiments, one in medicine, one in physics, one in materials, designed to explicitly test shaping by fractional phase, not by brute force energy, with clear methods and success metrics. 1. Medicine. Phase-coded morphogenesis on a living sheet. The goal, show specific phase fields guide cell self-organization. The setup, a sheet of living cells on a conductive hydrogel with a microelectrode array for precise field control. The input, apply half phase for polarity, O phase for closure hexagons, and O phase for spirals programs, all at the same constant energy level, RMS. The proof. Seeing the cells collectively change shape or pattern specifically in response to the phase program switch, and seeing it be reversible. That shows phase, not just energy, as the driver.
Okay, direct biological test.
2. Physics. Powder-written geometry on a vibrating plate. The goal. Show phase-coded vibrations deterministically create specific geometric patterns. The setup. A metal plate with fine power, vibrated by actuators using carefully timed signals, maybe time reversal focusing. The input, drive actuators with halves all and over phase codes, again at constant total vibrational energy. The proof, seeing clean program-specific patterns emerge, diamond grids for Ha, hex lattices for O, maybe decagonal or spiral-like skeletons for O at equal energy. Also seeing patterns rotate predictably if you advance the overall phase and collapse if you randomize phases. Physical geometry from phase codes, got it. 3. Materials. Stabilized quasicrystal self-assembly in a colloid. The goal. Show specific phase fields induce self-assembly of complex non-repeating material structures. The setup. A suspension of tiny anisotropic nanoparticles in a thin cell surrounded by electrodes. The input. Apply Oro and Orphée phase programs using EM fields, keeping field strength a constant. The proof. Seeing clear signs of decagonal quasicrystal order, unique scattering peaks, specifically under the OR program, standard hexagonal patterns under OR, and being able to switch reproducibly between them just by changing the phase signature at equal energy input.
Growing quasicrystals on demand with phase?
Exactly. These experiments are designed for rigor-locked energy, blinded analysis, cross-validation where possible, like seeing similar rotational responses across different systems. They aim to move the field law from compelling idea to demonstrable, actionable science. Hashtag take take after all.
Wow. What an absolutely incredible deep dive that was. We started just by asking a seemingly simple question, what creates fractions of time? And we ended up with potentially a whole new blueprint for how reality itself is structured. From the fundamental cycle of the universe right down to the patterns in our own consciousness, and even exploring how we might begin to actively shape it all.
Indeed, we really trace that proposed cascade. Smooth time folds fractures into fractions. Those fractions become boundaries. Boundaries create geometry. And geometry solidifies into all the form we perceive: space, matter, life. From why stars shine to why rivers flow, why trees grow, the coldness of space, the nature of black holes, and even the emergence of consciousness. The claim is it's a single unified story written in the language of phase relationships.
And it feels like this isn't just about understanding the world passively, it's about potentially engaging with it in a completely new, maybe more fundamental way. I mean, imagine applying these principles deliberately in medicine, in engineering, and how we explore the cosmos. The potential implications are just staggering to think about.
Absolutely. The challenge now, if this framework holds water, is to move from explanation to action. The framework argues the proofs are visible all around us in nature's recurring patterns, and the predictions, like those flagship experiments, are testable. And the key takeaway is that the real lever to shape reality might not be about more brute force, but about learning to tune these subtle phase relationships, the very fractions of time that supposedly build everything.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Here's maybe a provocative thought to leave you with. If our universe truly is a cycle, constantly folding and creating form through these fractions, and if our own consciousness is a resonance of these attractors, what new forms could you potentially create, or what existing forms could you maybe retune if you started to understand and perhaps even sense the hidden fractional rhythms playing out in your own reality? That is definitely a lot to mull over. Thank you so much for joining us on this extraordinary deep dive today.